Good morning and welcome. I'm Gloria Matera, Green Party of New York co-chair. I'm in Brooklyn, New York, part of the unceded homeland of the Lenape people. Colonial settlers and federal policies perpetrated generations of genocide, forced migration, and systemic violent oppression. We acknowledge today's Lenape communities and support their movements to reestablish their visible presence here in their ancestral lands. Today, we are recognizing the second anniversary of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, coming into force in January 2021. Today, you will hear about this important but unfortunately little known treaty because sadly, but not surprisingly, the United States has yet to sign, the only country to have used nuclear weapons in war, bombing Nagasaki and Hiroshima in the final days of World War II. No candidate or elected official of the two parties of war and Wall Street have advocated for disarmament, and the presidents of both parties continue to pour money into nuclear proliferation. The Green Party of the United States platform calls for abolishing all nuclear weapons and sets out conditions and a schedule for accomplishing that goal. You can read about this and our other positions on peace and disarmament in the party platform at gp.org. The program will start with speakers who have been working in the anti-war and nuclear disarmament movements, and then a reading from some of the actual treaty. Our first speaker is Vicki Elson, Nuclear Ban US. Take it away, Vicki.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. Boy, if everybody was had the Green Party's values, this job would be so easy. So we are living in Washington, D.C. We moved here to lobby Congress on the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and on total nuclear abolition, not just arms control or non-proliferation. So we actually have had some success. We've got some members of Congress who are willing to speak out about total abolition, and there's a video of them on our website, nuclearban.us. It pops right up. And you might find that a little bit cheering. It makes me happy that there's at least some. We lost a couple in the last election, but there are a bunch of new members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus coming in, and we'll be meeting with some of them starting tomorrow. So in Congress, what we're working on is a couple of things. There's the bill by Eleanor Holmes Norton, which hopefully a lot of you know about. It was HR 2850 in the last session. And in the new session, it'll have a new number and probably some new language. We are working with her to make the language, even clearer that it's really about warheads to windmills. Sign the treaty, start working with the other nuclear armed nations towards ratification in all countries. And then once that's done, we can ratify, we can shift the wasted resources from weapons of mass extinction to green technologies, climate solutions, and pressing human needs. So she has been putting in a bill like that for many, many years. And together with Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, we've been working on including the treaty and making that a really important part of it. So, so that's exciting news. Oh, we have, oh, it doesn't come out on my thing. Okay, there it is, visual aid. Warheads to Windmills is a report that we wrote in 2019. We're currently updating it and forming a coalition about warheads to windmills to support the Norton bill and to support all efforts in that direction. And I hope that the Green Party will be part of that coalition, which would be, it's going to be, I think, good crossover between all kinds of different issues, not just peace and nukes, but climate and healthcare and housing and education too. So the other thing we're working on in Congress, so we do have some co-sponsors for the Norton bill, and we have a bunch more potential ones. And then other people have done that and or signed the ICAN pledge to support the treaty. ICAN is the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. They're our parent organization, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017 for facilitating the treaty. So the legislative pledge has been signed by thousands of legislators all over the world, and we're trying to get more American legislators on board, and we do have some. So our goal is, getting just a critical mass and making abolition a good word. So the Biden letter, you can see where the poster behind me is, it's a banner, US sign the nuclear ban treaty now. We are going to be taking that to the White House this afternoon with a letter, and it's been signed by 101 organizations so far, and it's been another 800 people have written as individuals. And that's really exciting because, just a few days ago, we hadn't written the letter yet. And already all these people have signed on. It must be an idea whose time has come. People are tired of messing around with partial solutions and just want to get to the heart of it. And I'm so excited that the Green Party has that same approach. I think it's really important. I don't think we have time to take other, to spend on other kind of measures. Sign the treaty. Biden's an Irish Catholic. The Pope is behind this. Ireland has the strictest enforcement rules so far in the world of countries that have joined the treaty, that you can go to prison for life or be heavily fined in Ireland if you're breaking any of the parts of the treaty, theoretically. So there are 68 countries now that have signed that have ratified the treaty. 92 have signed, so that means a couple of dozen that are in the process of ratifying, and a whole bunch more support it. Really most of the planet. It's just the 9 nuclear armed countries that are being reticent about it. And actually sometimes the US actually tries to shut down these things. But I think that day is gone by, and it's time to really get the US to sign the nuclear ban treaty, start the process with the other countries of total disarmament. And I think we can, and I think we must. Do I still have time? I can tell you a little bit about what's in the letter.
That is the time, but thank you so much, Vicki.
Sure.
The link is in the chat.
Good.
And we're going to do calls to action to continue signing the letter.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Vicki. Our next speaker is Helen Jaccard from Veterans for Peace.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. I'm really happy to be here, and I'd just like to introduce you to the Golden Rule vote. And I'm going to share my screen so I can show just a little bit visually, since it's quite the and from the beginning, there we go. Okay, so this is the Golden Rule. It was sailed towards the Marshall Islands in 1958 in an attempt to stop nuclear weapons testing. The United States detonated 67 nuclear weapons in the Marshall Islands from 1946 to 1958. It's a project of Veterans for Peace. And the boat was restored from 2010 to 2015. And then we started sailing around the West Coast and all around the Hawaiian Islands. We were headed for Japan, and COVID struck, so we couldn't go to Japan. This is a picture from last year. We'll have a similar one this year, but we've always supported the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons ever since 2017 when the language was passed. So we made out a year with a banner like this to show our support. When we returned from Hawaii, mostly due to COVID, we decided that it was time to do what the rebuilders of the Golden Rule had in mind, which was to sail all of the navigable waters of the United States. So we decided to do what's called the Great Loop. And we trucked the Golden Rule to Minneapolis and started down the Mississippi River with the intention to go down the entire Mississippi River. They have a drought going on right now, and the lower Mississippi is not navigable for us. So we diverted over into the Ohio, Tennessee, and Tombigbee systems and came out in Mobile, Alabama. We went down the coast of Florida and sailed to Havana and back. So we've just gotten back from Cuba. And this morning, the Golden Rule just left Miami, headed for Fort Lauderdale. This is a major undertaking of 15 months. It's going to take over 10,000 miles, and we'll visit over 100 cities and towns. Our schedule, you can find a link to it at vfpgoldenrule.org. If you live in a place anywhere along the coast, we're probably going to visit you. We're going clear up past Portland, Maine, to protest against the Bath Iron Works and the so we'll be up in Bath, Maine, and then we're going to come back to New York City and go through the Hudson River and the Erie Canal and the Oswego Canal into the Great Lakes, where we'll eventually come out from Chicago and head south back to the Gulf of Mexico. Which will be around a year from now, we'll be arriving there. So this is a big speaking tour by water. And let's see, we do a lot of activities wherever we are, supporting the Marshallese, wherever we encounter them, which has been about 3 different times. And we ask people to take action. We ask them to support efforts to stop financing nuclear weapons and to get companies to convert from producing nuclear weapons to producing things that are life affirming, like energy systems that are that we need. We try to support legislation like the Eleanor Holmes Norton bill and the one that was just in Congress. I think it's a Markey bill. So I'm hoping for success with those bills as much as we just keep building and building on that. We support Back from the Brink. They're one of our sponsors. And I wanted to make sure you know that I'm also a member of Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And also wherever we go, we try to introduce local legislation in support of the treaty. Even our mayoral welcomes, we try to get those resolutions of welcome include a little information about why we're trying to eliminate the possibility of nuclear war. So with that, I'll help keep us on schedule by stopping my share and let people ask questions whenever that's appropriate.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you for sharing this amazing journey that you have been a part of. Our next speaker, Kay Kobanis, is a fellow Green Party member in New York and the co-chair of the Green Party Peace Action Committee. You can go right ahead and unmute, Haig, and take it away.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. So I'm going to try to ring the alarm bell here for danger of nuclear war and put it in the context of current events. And I'm going to start with can everyone see my screen at this point? I'm going to have to restart Zoom. I'm sorry.
I can't see it.
While Haig is getting his slideshow up, I'd like to give that address again for the Veterans for Peace Golden Rule Project. That's VFP goldenruleproject.org. So much history and good information there. Really urge you all to check it out.
We encourage people to look at the links that are in the chat and the information while we're waiting, and looks like we're ready to go.
Okay, sorry for the technical glitch. The danger of nuclear war is something that has been with us ever since 1945. And a lot of people have not kept pace in terms of thinking about what the current situation is in terms of this threat. The arsenal of modern nuclear weapons is far more dangerous than what people think about in terms of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki attacks. These weapons are hundreds of times more powerful, and the likelihood of surviving if you're in an urban area or even near an urban area of a nuclear attack is quite small. It's no longer a matter of a single warhead striking a major city. Nuclear missiles now have multiple warheads, and the engineers of destruction have determined that multiple warheads striking a city are far more devastating than a single large warhead. So I live in the outskirts of New York, and if New York becomes a nuclear target, it will be utterly destroyed, the entire metropolitan area. Those living away from major cities will probably be worse off because they'll watch the disintegration of civilization. And of course, in recent decades, the danger of nuclear winter has also been discovered and described, but this hasn't really made a dent. The inertia of militarism is such that people still act as though superior force can decide international conflicts. I'm going to talk about the current context of the danger of nuclear escalation. There's an enormous conventional war underway in Europe, the largest war since 1945, involving proxy war between the US, NATO, and Russia. Ukraine is being devastated by this struggle, and there's a slow escalation taking place. Some scenarios can lead to the use of nuclear weapons. For example, direct intervention by NATO troops, which might result in a complete defeat of Russia or possible invasion of Russia, destruction of the Black Sea Fleet, of Russia's naval capabilities, Russian attack on a NATO member, a false flag, tactical nuclear strike, something meant to precipitate a larger nuclear exchange, and possibly an escalatory covert action. And if you were following the news, you'd see that somebody blew up the Nord Stream pipelines in September. And most people using deduction and evaluation of the players in this struggle would say that it was the United States. Of course, the United States has denied it, but the record of US covert action and culpability for decades would call that claim into question. So there are nuclear weapons in Europe. They're poised for use. They're B-61 nuclear bombs. They're 20 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb, and they are a threat to Russia, to Europe, to the world, because once they're used, the Russians have made it plain that any nuclear detonation on their territory will result in massive retaliation, which would in turn result in an exchange that would likely trigger a nuclear winter. So that is the horror that's in prospect. The US has put the power of nuclear war in the hands of one man, the president. We have a peculiar system that doesn't allow any legal consultation or restraint on the president's authority to use nuclear weapons. The vice president only has the requirement to confirm that it is the president who has ordered an attack. He cannot countermand it. And the only way it can be stopped is for the military to break their oaths of allegiance and commit treason. Let's hope they have the sense to do that if this terrible event ever ensues. The nuclear football that the president has with him at all times contains nuclear attack plans. And strangely, the US public has no interest in what those plans are. I believe that's because the public doesn't want to be complicit. But of course, we are complicit as long as we allow this bizarre arrangement to continue. Inside that
1 minute.
briefcase are
Thank you. 1 more minute, Haig.
plans for devastation. So I'll just quickly finish by saying a nuclear exchange would take less than a day, and it would inflict horrific damage worldwide. The neocons are still firmly in command of US foreign policy. All the people involved in disastrous blunders for the last 20 years are still guiding the militaristic policies of the US. And experts are telling us that we're closer to nuclear catastrophe than ever before. So I'll finish on that note.
Thank you, Haig, for that informative slideshow. Our next speaker, our former Green Party presidential candidate, but also a longtime activist and organizer around the issues of peace, Environment, Dr. Jill Stein.
Good morning, everyone. All for being here. Thank you so much to Green Party of Florida for organizing this very important event. 48 hours, what we do now, planning and going from here today. I'm going to kind of take up where Haig left off. Those of us who were around for the anti-nuclear moves, really, and the Cold War, of how much our mobilization matters. And as someone, from my perspective, as a young person growing up with duck and cover and the Cold War from there and the Cuban Missile Crisis, having an awareness of what these weapons actually are, a real reality check on what it is, the incredible risks that are being inflicted on us without our knowledge and without our consent is really important. And I'm going to continue sounding the alarm here, as Haig said in his introduction. And Gloria, if you could give me like a 5-minute and then again a 1 minute, that would be really great. So I'm going to try to share my screen here. Hang on 1 second. Okay, are you seeing a PowerPoint slides? Yes, okay, great. So let me just get that out of the way. All right, so here we're basically, I'm calling this the countdown to doomsday because we are on that countdown right now. And learning that is very powerful and motivating to get off of that countdown. And this is essentially the argument for why we really need the ban treaty now. Let me just get this working here, sorry. All right, so as was said earlier, the bombs we're talking about today are in an entirely different category from Hiroshima. And this is, or the bombs used in Hiroshima, they are actually 20, 40, and 100, several hundred times more powerful, and they are dropped. Cities are targeted. The conventional wisdom is that 10 or 20, 40 bombs are targeted at each city. And, that ensures that there will be impact, and it also greatly enhances the impact. This was Hiroshima. In today's bombs, you would not see a single building standing. Just for those who are into the numbers, the Hiroshima bomb was 15 kilotons. That means 1,000 tons of dynamite, basically. It was, remember the number 15 kilotons. Now we're talking 20 megatons, which is 1,000 times greater, plus a little more than what Hiroshima was hit with. And again, there are multiple smaller bombs that are targeted at an individual city. And I just wanted to run through what happens, because for those of us who were around as this information came out, and some of this was prior to the big movement that brought 1 million people out to Central Park, for example, in the 1980s, that eventually then led to one of the really important treaties, the Intermediate Nuclear Treaty, also known as the INF. It was, it was that mobilization that created progress, and it was the reality, the understanding of what the risk was that helped generate that movement. So within 1/1000th of a second, a fireball would extend 4 miles across. Within 1/1000th of a second, temperatures of 20 million degrees would be reached, and everything would be vaporized for about 4 miles, an area 4 miles across. Over a much larger area, then you have this huge pressure wave, and with that comes 650-mile-an-hour winds. My understanding is that because of the heat generated, much of that directly up, almost like the rapture, where everything is kind of mobilized up into the heavens, but sort of in a vaporized form that is ending life. It's just, the imagery is incredibly apocalyptic here. And over an area 32 miles wide, basically everything that can burn will start to burn. Those merge into a huge firestorm that basically covers 32 miles. So, I used to think, oh, I'm 10, 12 miles from Boston, no worries, but actually we're all going to go together here. It will be one giant conflagration. So distance is should not be the comfort that people may have once thought. What is in our toolbox? And bear in mind here that our toolbox is similar to Russia's. We both have 5,500, 6,000 nuclear weapons. Not quite half are operational. The rest are in reserve. All of this has cost us, by the way, approximately $10 trillion to develop over the decade. There are 3 legs to this triad. There are the land-based, there are air-based, and there are sea-based. And one point I want to make is that there's something Russia has called the Perimeter Program. And that ensures that if we or someone else try to take Russia out with a surprise attack and you go for Moscow, a so-called decapitation strategy, actually, you can take out everybody in Moscow, and that will actually trigger what's called the dead hand. And that is a massive launch of all nuclear missiles that are currently targeted and on hair trigger alert. It's widely assumed that the US has the same. So this stuff here is kind of on automatic pilot. It relies on systems that, if you knew about, you would not be sleeping at night. So it's very important for us to get off of this train while we still can. I want to mention some of the policies that supercharge the nuclear threat. And one is the militarism that we are, the global leader on, the dismantling of nuclear treaties, which has also been really at the US instigation, the policy of full spectrum dominance, which we'll come to in a moment, and NATO expansion, which is essentially the Cuban Missile Crisis in reverse. And we'll talk about those if there's time. But first, on the issue of militarism, I won't go through all the details here, but I think it's widely understood that US militarism is completely off the charts. $21 trillion spent on this since 2001, according to the National Priorities Project. That consumes half of the congressional discretionary budget. Now it's more than half, up to some $850 or so billion in the most recent appropriation. This is out of date, 67 billion for Ukraine. That's now up towards 115 billion. We have 800 military bases around the world. The rest of the world together has 30, maybe 50, something like that. 68 coups and regime change operations since the 1950s. According to the Congressional Research Center, the US has launched 251 military interventions since 1991. So, all of this creates a setting in which there are enormous opportunities for confrontation and provocation of the use of nuclear weapons, including the possible US involvement in an effort to so-called retake Crimea, which would be incredibly provocative. And there are many lessons, I think, that can be learned from the successful solving of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is essentially what we're in right now. And we will come to that if we can. But the bottom line is we really need to negotiate. We need to pull back from these preconditions that essentially supercharge the nuclear threat while we are eliminating the nuclear threat, which would do wonders to reduce the concerns about militarism that's gone totally off the rails. The policy of full spectrum dominance should be mentioned here because this has been the explicit policy of the US military since 1991 and the fall of the Soviet Union. Excerpts from the Pentagon's plan were published in the New York Times in 1992, basically saying we have to prevent the reemergence of a new rival. A rival is a power that commands resources in a region that could generate sufficient power that it could be a regional or a global threat. And this imperative to prevent the reemergence of a new rival applies not only to hostile powers, but also to friendly ones, that we do not want to see the emergence of a power who can rival ours. This is the so-called monopolar approach to foreign policy. And, it's appropriate for the bully in the schoolyard, but it's not appropriate for an interdependent world, interdependent economically, in terms of climate, in terms of the movements of mass migrations. We need to solve these problems together, otherwise they will not be solved and will be generating a whole lot. So this basic policy of full spectrum dominance, which has been repeatedly reiterated by the Department of Defense, is why we are exercising, this hypermilitarism that creates the real threat. And this is just to, specify recent policies by the White House that maintain this status quo, including rushing new tactical nuclear weapons to Europe, doubling down on the $2 billion plan, which was initiated actually by Obama. It cost a whole lot less at the time, but now it's up to $2 trillion to build a new generation of nuclear weapons, revamping the old ones. This is a direct violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which I'll mention if we have a moment. But that treaty says to the other countries that don't have nuclear weapons, we don't want you to get them, because that would really be a crazy world. So in turn, we promised to work towards the elimination of our weapons. And this was a promise made back in, I don't remember, I think the 70s. We'll have a slide on that in a second. But we are directly violating that treaty, which is one of the few remaining treaties, because we have much to gain from that treaty, preventing the total spread of nuclear weapons around the world. If we want that part of the agreement, we need to keep our part of the agreement. This is just a list of the nuclear treaties, and this is really for your reference, and I can make these slides available if anyone is interested. But this, demonstrates sort of the march of treaties over the period of time. This 1987 Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty was the treaty that followed this mass mobilization that got rid of the very missiles that NATO is now reinstalling basically around Russia's border, and that has really caused the crisis to come to a head.
Apologies, Jill, about a 3-minute.
Okay, thank you. I think I can just finish up here quickly. This just documents how the US has sort of led the charge in dismantling nuclear treaties. It's hard to imagine why anyone in their right mind would do this unless they have an enormous financial stake in doing so. And to my mind, this just underscores the incredible power of the weapons industry, which you may know has spent over like $2 billion in the last 2 decades or so lobbying, and has more than one lobbyist for every congressperson on Capitol Hill. And this is just a dangerous piece of misinformation out there, which is that nuclear war is survivable. This is absolutely laughable, this promo that was put out about a year ago, saying things like, oh, there may be a bright flash of light that could temporarily blind you for less than a minute. Nuclear explosions are unpredictable, but it doesn't mean you can't take precautions to stay safe. And then later on it says, the IRC, the International Red Cross, says there would be no help for hours, perhaps days after an explosion, since electricity would be cut and medical professions would be killed. And that's actually true. In Hiroshima, something like 90% of all medical professionals were killed in the explosion or the immediate aftermath. And remember, we have bombs today that are about whose impact and their targeting would be about 1,000 times stronger than Hiroshima. So I'm going to just end there saying that, we have the facts on our side, the ethics and morality are on our side. And I think basic human goodwill and sense of community is very much on our side. It's all about getting the word out. And I look forward to working with this group to help make sure that that happens. Thank you so much. And I will stop the share.
Thank you, Jill, for this important but frightening facts that people need to know about it. So now we're going to have a reading from the excerpts from the actual treaty, and that will be done by Madeline Hoffman from the Green Party Peace Action Committee and Green Party of New Jersey, and Rose Roby, former campaign manager for the Matt Ho Senate campaign and Green Party of North Carolina. So let's listen to these two powerhouse Green Party women let us know what's in that treaty.
Thank you. Thank you, Gloria. Let me see if my video will. Okay, there we go. I'm also a co-chair of the Green Party Peace Action Committee at the national level, along with Hayek. So we're just between Rose and me. We're going to read this excerpt from the treaty. I'll start, and we'll be alternating voices so you don't feel too, lulled to sleep by only one voice at a time.
Yes, we can
Okay.
lull you to sleep with two voices. No, only kidding. This is all very important.
No, we're going to keep you awake with two voices.
Darn right.
All right, on January 22nd, 2021, 90 days after the nation of Honduras deposited its articles of ratification with the Secretary General of the United Nations, thus becoming the 50th nation to officially join the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, that treaty entered into force.
This treaty places nuclear weapons in the same category as biological weapons, chemical weapons, landmines, and poison gases. Nuclear weapons are now, under international law, declared to be illegal. We will read excerpts of the treaty now. Madam.
Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The states parties to this treaty determined to contribute to the realization of the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations.
Deeply concerned about the catastrophic humanitarian consequences that would result from any use of nuclear weapons, and recognizing the consequent need to completely eliminate such weapons, which remains the only way to guarantee that nuclear weapons are never used again under any circumstances.
Mindful of the risks posed by the continued existence of nuclear weapons, including from any nuclear weapon detonation by accident, miscalculation, or design, and emphasizing that these risks concern the security of all humanity and that all states share the responsibility to prevent any use of nuclear weapons.
Cognizant that the catastrophic consequences of nuclear weapons cannot be adequately addressed, transcend national borders, pose grave implications for human survival, the environment, socioeconomic development, the global economy, food security, and the health of current and future generations, and have a disproportionate impact on women and girls, including as a result of ionizing radiation.
Acknowledging the ethical imperatives for nuclear disarmament and the urgency of achieving and maintaining a nuclear weapon-free world, which is a global public good of the highest order, serving both national and collective security interests.
Mindful of the unacceptable suffering of harm caused to the victims of the use of nuclear weapons, Hayabakushka, as well as those affected by the testing of nuclear weapons.
Recognizing the disproportionate impact of nuclear weapon activities on indigenous peoples.
Reaffirming the need for all states at all times to comply with applicable international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law.
Basing themselves on the principles and rules of international humanitarian law, in particular, the principle that the right of parties to an armed conflict to choose methods or means of warfare is not unlimited. The rule of distinction, the prohibition against indiscriminate attacks, the rules on proportionality and precautions in attack, the prohibition on the use of weapons of a nature to cause superfluous injury or unnecessary suffering, and the rules for the protection of the natural environment.
Considering that any use of nuclear weapons would be contrary to the rules of international law applicable in armed conflict, in particular, the principles and rules of international humanitarian law.
Could you keep reading, please, Rose?
Sure. Reaffirming that any use of nuclear weapons would also be abhorrent to the principles of humanity and the dictates of public conscience. Recalling that, in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations, states must refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations, and that the establishment and maintenance of international peace and security are to be promoted with the least aversion for armaments of the world's human and economic resources.
Recalling also the first resolution of the General Assembly of the United Nations, adopted on 24th January 1946, and subsequent resolutions which call for the elimination of nuclear weapons.
Concerned by the slow pace of nuclear disarmament, the continued reliance on nuclear weapons in the military and security concepts, doctrines and policies, and the waste of economic and human resources on programs for the production, maintenance, and modernization of nuclear weapons.
Recognizing that a legally binding prohibition of nuclear weapons constitutes an important contribution towards the achievement and maintenance of a world free of nuclear weapons, including the irreversible, verifiable, and transparent elimination of nuclear weapons, and determined to act toward that end.
Determined to act with a view to achieving effective progress towards general and complete disarmament under strict and effective international control.
Reaffirming that there exists an obligation to pursue in good faith and bring to a conclusion negotiations leading to nuclear disarmament in all its aspects under strict and effective international control.
Reaffirming also that the full and effective implementation of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, which serves as the cornerstone of the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation regime, has a vital role to play in promoting international peace and security.
Recognizing the vital importance of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty and its verification regime as a core element of the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation regime.
Reaffirming the conviction that the establishment of the internationally recognized nuclear weapon-free zones on the basis of arrangements freely arrived at among the states of the regions concerned enhances global and regional peace and security, strengthens the nuclear nonproliferation regime, and contributes towards realizing the objective of nuclear disarmament.
Emphasizing that nothing in this treaty shall be interpreted as affecting the inalienable right of its states parties to develop research, production, and use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes without discrimination.
Recognizing that equal, full, and effective participation of both women and men is an essential factor for the promotion and attainment of sustainable peace and security, and committed to supporting and strengthening the effective participation of women in nuclear disarmament.
Recognizing also the importance of peace and disarmament education in all its aspects, and of raising awareness of the risks and consequences of nuclear weapons for current and future generations, and committed to the dissemination of the principles and norms of this treaty.
Stressing the role of public conscience in furthering the principles of humanity, as evidenced by the call for the total elimination of nuclear weapons, and recognizing the efforts to that end undertaken by the United Nations, the International Red Cross, and the Red Crescent Movement, other international and regional organizations, non-governmental organizations, religious leaders, parliamentarians, academics, and the Hayabusa.
Have agreed as follows. Article 1, prohibitions. Each state party undertakes never, under any circumstances, to A, develop, test, produce, manufacture, otherwise acquire, possess, or stockpile nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices.
B, transfer to any recipient whatsoever nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices, or control over such weapons or explosive devices directly or indirectly.
Receive the transfer of or control over nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices directly or indirectly.
D,
That's C, by the way.
D, use or threaten to use nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices.
E, assist, encourage, or induce in any way anyone to engage in any activity prohibited to a state party under this treaty.
F, seek or receive any assistance in any way from anyone to engage in any activity prohibited to a state party under this treaty.
G, allow any stationing, installation, or deployment of any nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices in its territory or at any place under its jurisdiction or control.
Article 4, towards the total elimination of nuclear weapons. Each state party that after 7 July 2017 owned, possessed, or controlled nuclear weapons or any other nuclear explosive devices and eliminated its nuclear weapon program, including the elimination of irreversible conversion of all nuclear weapons related facilities, prior to the entry into force of this treaty for it, shall cooperate with the competent international authority designated pursuant to paragraph 6 of this article for the purpose of verifying the irreversible elimination of its nuclear weapon program.
2, notwithstanding Article 1A, each state party that owns, possesses, or controls nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices shall immediately remove them from operational status and destroy them as soon as possible, but not later than a deadline to be determined by the first meeting of states parties, in accordance with a legally binding, time-bound plan for the verified and irreversible elimination of that state party's nuclear weapon program, including the elimination or irreversible conversion of all nuclear weapons related facilities.
3, a state party to which paragraph 2 above applies shall conclude a safeguards agreement with the International Atomic Energy Agency sufficient to provide credible assurance of the non-diversion of declared nuclear material from peaceful nuclear activities and the absence of undeclared nuclear material or activities in the state as a whole.
4, each state party that has any nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices in its territory or in any place under its jurisdiction or control that are owned, possessed, or controlled by another state shall ensure the prompt removal of such weapons as soon as possible, but not later than a deadline to be determined by the first meeting of state parties. Upon the removal of such weapons or other explosive devices, that state party shall submit to the Secretary General of the United Nations a declaration that it has fulfilled its obligations under this article.
6, the state parties shall designate a competent international authority or authorities to negotiate and verify the irreversible elimination of nuclear weapons programs, including the elimination or irreversible conversion of all nuclear weapons related facilities in accordance with paragraphs 1, 2, and 3 of this article. In the event that such designation has not been made prior to the entry into force of this treaty for a state party to which paragraph 1 or 2 of this article applies, the Secretary General of the United Nations shall convene an extraordinary meeting of state parties to take any decisions that may be required.
Article 5, National Implementation. 1, each state party shall adopt the necessary measures to implement its obligations under this treaty.
2, each state party shall take appropriate legal, administrative, and other measures, including the imposition of penal sanctions to prevent and suppress any activities prohibited to a state party under this treaty undertaken by persons or on territory under its jurisdiction or control.
Article 6, Victim Assistance and Environmental Remediation. 1, each state party shall, with respect to individuals under its jurisdiction who are affected by the use or testing of nuclear weapons, in accordance with applicable international humanitarian and human rights law, adequately provide age and gender sensitive assistance without discrimination, including medical care, rehabilitation, and psychological support, as well as provide for their social and economic inclusion.
2, each state party with respect to areas under its jurisdiction or control contaminated as a result of activities related to the testing or use of nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices shall take necessary and appropriate measures towards the environmental remediation of areas so contaminated.
3, the obligations under paragraphs 1 and 2 above shall be without prejudice to the duties and obligations of any other states under international law or bilateral agreements.
Article 15, entry into force. 1, this treaty shall enter into force 90 days after the 50th instrument of ratification, acceptance, approval, or accession has been deposited.
2, for any state that deposits its instrument of ratification, acceptance, approval, or accession after the date of the deposit of the 50th instrument of ratification, acceptance, approval, or accession, this treaty shall enter into force 90 days after the date on which that state has deposited its instrument of ratification, acceptance, approval, or accession.
Article 16, reservations. The articles of this treaty shall not be subject to reservations.
Article 17, duration and withdrawal. This, number one, this treaty shall be of unlimited duration. And thus concludes our reading of these excerpts. I noted some comments being made during the reading, but I didn't get a chance to review any of them.
I had to keep my eye on this at all times, so I couldn't actually look at comments.
Right. Thank
Same
you,
here.
Madeline and Rose. And Madeline, apologies for not mentioning you are one of the co-chairs of the Green Party Peace Action Committee.
That's all right.
So
Many thanks to Madeline Hoffman.
we have Steve
Go
Newman
ahead.
from the Green Party of Florida, who's really going to tell us what we can actually do, talk about the calls to action. So Steve, go right ahead.
And Steve,
Well, I just first want to thank Madeline Hoffman and Roby for that reading, as well as our other presenters today, Vicki Elson with Nuclear Band US, Helen Jaccard with the Veterans for Peace, Golden Rule Boat Project, Haig Hoviness with the GPUS Peace Action Committee, and two-time Green Party nominee for President of the United States, Dr. Jill Stein. This has certainly been a sobering reminder of the apocalyptic threat from nuclear weapons that our planet's inhabitants have been living under for decades now. And I'm sure you all would like to also be agents of change that we so desperately need on this and many other fronts. There are a myriad of ways to pressure our political representatives towards positive change. And I want to reiterate the following 3 calls to action. First, please sign the letter to President Biden, for which there are links in this chat, one for organizations and one for individuals. Second, create a watch party for the Doomsday Clock announcement this Tuesday, January 24th at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, to raise awareness that the Doomsday Clock that is stood at 100 seconds to midnight will be updated to reflect the increased threat that humanity is now facing. You can see more on that at thebulletin.org. And third, go meet the historic Golden Rule Peace Boat and/or support their efforts on their anti-nuclear educational and humanitarian voyage to promote Veterans for Peace, calls to stop the war machine and abolish nuclear weapons. Our Miami-Dade Greens enjoyed their time with the crew. Please check out their route and support the effort at vfpgoldenruleproject.org. And now I have the pleasure of introducing Cherokee, Pipe Carrier, and Green Party of California member, Sunali Hutsuvia, for a Native American land ceremony.
Steve, you need to make her co-host.
Wado, and thank you, everyone. My name is Sunali Hasalua. I am here in the South Bay region of California, where the Sikawan band of the Kumeyaay Nation, this was their land. Wanted to acknowledge their existence first. I wanted to speak about the impact of nuclear arms and nuclear power on the Native American peoples before I went into a prayer for the land. The impact on Native reservations is, it's been devastating to our people. I have some, I apologize because I'm trying to find my information here. Okay. First, we speak of the Yakima, the Colville, Nez Perce, Spokane, Umatilla, Klickitat, and others from the Hanford Nuclear Reservation in Washington State area, where the Hanford Nuclear Reservation has created dramatic increases in cancer rates among Indigenous peoples. Radioactive gases and fluids released between 1944 and 1977 directly affected fish and wildlife. 8 out of 9 reactors at the facility were water cooled from the Columbia River, which feeds and nourishes a lot of people. I speak of the Spokane. In 1957, the Dawn Mining Company began operating the Midnight Mine only a few miles from the Spokane Reservation in Washington. The mine was closed in 1981, The leftover uranium mining pits hold contaminated water. One pit holds 450 million gallons of contaminated water. This is a major concern for this water is seeping into Lake Roosevelt. I speak of the Kaibab Paute and Ahavasapai, the Energy Fuels Nuclear Developing Canyon Mine. The Canyon Mine, along with the Sage Mine, will be built on the southern rim of the Grand Canyon. Canyon Mine will disturb 17 acres of land for a 1,400-foot shaft and surface facilities. The site sits on top of a major aquifer, which is also near the Cataract Creek and contaminate major bodies of water. The site also lies near and partially on sacred and religious lands. I speak of the Navajo and the Hopi, where uranium mining and above ground nuclear weapons tests have occurred for about 50 years on and around these reservations. Since 1942, the reservation lands and surrounding area of the Navajo and Hopi have been mined for uranium. 13 million tons of uranium were mined on the Navajo reservation. The largest underground uranium mine on Navajo and Hopi lands were operated from 1979 to 1990. The worst nuclear accident happened in Uranium Mill, which is south of the Navajo reservation. More than 1,000 open pit and underground uranium mines on the reservation are abandoned, unreclaimed, and highly radioactive. Some 600 dwellings on Navajo tribal lands are contaminated with radiation. I speak of the Western Shoshone and the South Paute. The Nevada testing site is in the traditional land use area of the Western Shoshone and South Paute. The U.S. government appropriated land in 1957 for exploding nuclear weapons. The Western Shoshone are the most bombed nation on the earth. 814 nuclear tests have been done on their land since 1951. Substantial radioactive fallout has contributed to high concentrations of cancer and leukemia on the reservation. I also must speak of the Oglala Lakota. Uranium and gold mining occurs in the Black Hills of South Dakota, a sacred area for the Lakota. The U.S. Department of Energy wants to use even more land for such mining because the areas are rich in mineral deposits. Half of the gold mined in the United States each year comes from the Black Hills. The mining sites in the Black Hills could threaten underground water directly underneath the operating mines. Mining is seen as one cause of epidemic levels of sterility, miscarriages, cancer, and other diseases in the Pine Ridge Reservation. And finally, I must speak of my own people, the Cherokee. Radioactive waste on the Sequoia plant in Gore, Oklahoma was spread on Cherokee lands for testing as a fertilizer and demonstration purposes. The Cherokee National and Native Americans for a Clean Environment sued to shut down the plant. The plant was recently shut down. I needed to speak about these things before I prayed because we all need to pray. Because the Native and Indigenous peoples, not just in the United States, but all over the world, are the most impacted by all of these things. And we must fight. We must fight for my people because my people are the stewards of this land. We are here to teach and to care. And with this, I will begin my prayer. I apologize. It's very, very windy. I have also, if I may make a personal note, have been involved in the call for peace since even before I registered for the Green Party. I've been registered for the Green Party since I was old enough to register. But when I was 14 years old, I was invited to participate in the Poem of Peace. And that is actually what began my path. Creator, your humble children are here to gather and speak about the impact that we are having on Mother Earth. We pray that you help us to show everyone the way of peace, the way of a clean environment, the way of respect for the land and for the indigenous peoples. I pray that our leaders will listen and hear our words, that we may be able to plant a seed in our hearts. I pray for the lands of the Kumeyaay people, that they may be recognized, for this is their land. Gaeliga, Guado. Thank you so much, everyone, for giving me this moment.
Amen, Sonali. Thank you so much for that. And thank you to Gloria for emceeing and all our other presenters today. And that concludes this event. Thank you for joining us today. Aloha.
Thank you.
And if
Guado.
anybody would like to save the chat, you're welcome to, at the 3 dots at the bottom, be able to do that.
Thanks to everyone.
Yes, thank you to everyone.
Heartfelt thanks for all who participated, who spoke, who read, or who were online and will take action and put out the good energy for the delivery of the letter to Biden at 1:30 and for the Golden Rule peace vote, and hopefully to have watch parties for the Doomsday Clock announcement Tuesday, January 24th at 10 a.m.
Hope you don't
thank
mind if I
Lizzie, for-
say, sorry.
Go ahead, Lee.
I just wanted to say for a moment that it's an honor to be in a room with you, Dr. Stein. I met you once, but it was very briefly years ago. I was in Philadelphia when you stormed the DNC convention. I was there marching with all of you. I was there when you came out with everyone like the Pied Piper, and it was one of the most proudest moments of my life. And that is why I love you so much. You are just so human. Thank you so much for everything that you do. And thank you for the opportunity to be able to tell you so.
Twinkle that.
Here, here.
Can I just respond to say, Sunile, I can't tell you how inspired and uplifted and directed I feel by everything you do. Everything you've said here today to me is just gets to the heart of our purpose and our hope. And I can't thank you enough for your leadership role as we go forward. And it's wonderful to meet you again. The work you were doing back in 2016 was such an inspiration and such a source of wisdom and guidance to me back then and from the broader Indigenous communities. And I think we really need you going forward. And I'm just so grateful that you're here to continue helping us find the way forward, because as you've said, Indigenous people, this is nothing new to your struggle, and the wisdom and the humanity that you have forged out of this fire of colonialism and imperialism and land theft is so powerful and just goes right to the heart of the crisis that is now facing all of us. And I can't say how grateful I am that we have your experience and your wisdom to help guide us forward. So thank you. And I look forward to being in touch.
Thank you so much. Someday there will be an Indigenous caucus within the Green Party, and it will build a bridge that will bring us to that golden age. I pray for that every single day. Thank you so much, everyone. I must get back to work. I appreciate every single one of you. I love you all. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Lots of love, everyone. And I want to thank Lizzie too. Shout out to her for being such a dynamo of an organizer.
Yes.
Thanks, Lizzie.
Thank you, Lizzie.
Love energy. We are emissaries of positive energy, love energy for people and planet. So go out and be those emissaries.